Welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. I've got a full house today. Calvin Betton, our resident tennis coach, is here to defend his view on Coco Gauff's coaching team. And believe me, there's a defence to be mounted there. And we've also got George Bellshaw, who's here to defend those headphones. George, are they government issued? Is that why they look so ropey? Or
Yeah, I've been having real problems with my wireless ones. So I probably need to just invest. I think I've got an old pair in Birmingham. I just keep forgetting to dig them out. So I will endeavour to find them and look more trendy than
are you still homeless? Is that the main problem?
That is kind of the main theme at the minute. Yeah, it's good times.
Right.
I'm
okay.
stuck caught in a rock and a hard place between not being really willing to pay London prices at the minute,
but also wanting to live in London.
Also wanting to live in London. So
right.
It will come to a head eventually.
I think your effort to work against the market there, George, might be doomed to fail.
But I found the odd bargain, and I came second for one of them, which was, pretty painful. But
well, I mean, I imagine that Calvin Betton's flat in Barnsley is probably going to be empty for quite a while over the next couple of weeks. So,
good deal, George.
Yeah.
How are you, Calvin? This will be your last pod at home for a while, I would have thought.
Yeah, well, say it well. Might only be a week. Hopefully. Yeah, I think hopefully I'm going to actually try and do a little bit of travel in America after US Open. So
terrific. So if you're anywhere in America and you want a coach for the day and you're willing to put him up, then that sounds like Calvin putting his hand up. And I hear £1,000 a day is the going rate. So
my plan is to get as far away from a tennis court as possible, but needs must and what have you. So
I still think we need to organise some sort of special UK coaching day where we get some listeners along for some pearls of wisdom from Calvin.
I think that's mostly going to involve people trying to make me look like an idiot on a tennis court, which is very, very easy. But yeah, maybe when we get our new occasional co-host in, who is a much better tennis player than probably all of us, then there's a little tease for you. You can have fun in the comments.
Happening.
You can have fun in the comments guessing who that might be, but you'll find out in a couple of weeks. So anyway, we've got loads to talk about today because I think one of the best Masters events, or at least one of the most dramatic and in terms of quality of tennis, at least one of the best for a while in Cincinnati, has just finished. We'll talk about Novak Djokovic beating Carlos Alcaraz. We'll, of course, talk about Coco Gauff, as I've already mentioned. She finally beat Iga Swiatek and then followed it up by taking arguably the biggest title of her career. There's some not very good Juan Martin del Potro news. There's some not at all WTA finals news. And there is also some Stefanos Tsitsipas B-related news. If that's not Tennis Unfiltered, I don't know what is.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Yes, there is only one place to start, and it is, of course, Cincinnati, where the Western and Southern Open is clinging on to its home. This is just a side note, but we've talked about Cincinnati before and what a famous tournament it is. And I didn't realise it is the longest running in the same city tournament in the US. It's been held in Cincinnati, I think, since 1899. But rather, and this was pointed out by a listener a couple of weeks ago, rather disappointingly, it's been sold by the USTA to a guy called Ben Navarro, who's a sort of venture capital bloke, and he wants to move it to Charlotte in North Carolina. I have to say, if they don't fix the way they film the matches, then I'm going to back that move because I don't know if anyone else had some problems. Well, I know on Twitter, lots of people told me they did have a problem trying to watch matches during the day on the main court in Cincinnati. George, could you see the ball?
I have to be honest, I didn't watch that many in the day.
You're a night match man.
A bit more of a night match man. So was there just loads of glare?
But it's just so, as it was explained to me, and Calvin, you will have encountered this problem before, if you put the camera at the wrong end of the court so that the sun is shining in the direction of the camera and you've got a yellow ball on a light blue tennis court with a green surround, there's not a lot of contrast involved. And, as people can tell from my camera here, I've got direct sunlight coming in here. And even though I'm at an angle from it, it still creates a lot of you can't see the definition on my lovely cheekbones on this side, George. And I think
It's a loss for all of us.
Exactly. And it's basically the same problem. So, yeah, couldn't see a blimmin' thing. Which kind of neatly leads me on to our first listener question, which isn't Cincinnati specific, but it's Cincinnati adjacent. Oh, sorry, Calvin.
I just say, I don't know whether it's linked though, James, but the stadium at Cincinnati is a weird sort of stadium in that they have those kind of bits that stick out at the end on all four sides, where it looks like they've got like a stand that comes out of some exec boxes.
Yeah.
Or something. So I don't know whether the sun comes in at weird angles or what. But it's also funny that I was talking with tournament director last week, actually, about how I think 90% of hard courts now that you see anywhere in tennis are basically blue and green. And he said he thinks it's for that reason that they're the two best contrast colours for streaming and for seeing the ball. Because up until sort of the late 90s, everywhere around the world tended to have different colours of outdoor courts, either the same colour or sometimes, there was one place that had like yellow and purple, I remember. I know that Loughborough Tennis Centre has pink courts because it's their pink and purple because that's their university colours. But now it seems that like pretty much every tournament you go to, it's the blue and green.
Which, to be honest, I don't think was that good for streaming, like on basis of this. I know that in like the 90s, you see a lot of footage of like that light green, which is horrific. You absolutely can't see the ball on that. And it's very hard to see a tennis ball on a clay court. Basically, I don't know what colour court you're supposed to have, but maybe it is that kind of blue and green. It's just bad sun conditions. But anyway, I'm told there's not very much you can do about the sun. And have more tournaments in Britain in the winter. That'd be one thing. But anyway, talking of watching tennis matches, Andy Lee has been in touch on email. You can email us tennisunfiltered@gmail.com. We love getting your questions and we try and answer as many of them as possible. He asks, as a spectator, I always try and sit opposite the umpire's chair. Why can't someone in 2023 come up with a solution that would give spectators a better view on the player's bench side, e.g. a perspex chair or suspended umpire chair? I find it ridiculous that the view of a third of the court is still obstructed from a lower level. I do like the idea of the umpire being on like a sort of like a trapeze, like suspended from the corners of the court. Calvin, what do you think?
I've actually touched a nerve on me on this because since they've brought in that you're allowed to coach at tennis, that coaches can coach at tournaments now, but you can only do it from the players' box area, which at the level that I tend to coach tends to be at court level and on the side.
Yeah.
And it's often on the same side as the umpire's chair, which means that you don't get to see about, like the listener has said there, you don't get to see about 40% of the court. So I never like to sit on the umpires. I prefer to watch matches from behind anyway, but I can't really do that anymore because you have to sit in the chair if you want to coach. You have to sit in the coach's chair. And if you do, I always like to sit on the other side from the umpire just because the umpire's chair is pretty big if you're watching at court level. And from, for example, if you're watching from the baseline sort of area, you're going to lose like a whole half, especially in doubles, which is where I do most of my coaching. You're going to lose a whole tram line and half of the other side.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, actually. Like I always, whenever I do have a choice, and a bit like you, Calvin, I have to sit in press seats more often than not, which usually aren't actually on the same side as the umpire's chair because they don't want to have them on TV in case they're empty. But the best, George, you will know this well, the best press seats in the world are...
I would say maybe Longlen.
Yeah, that's the correct answer. It's Suzanne Longlen because you are right behind, you are not quite court level, but sort of... top of the wall at the back. So you're at kind of serve level. You're at toss up level, and you're right behind the gunner. And the players' boxes are just on the other side of the middle. So you're on the right hand side, and the players' boxes are on the left. So that's probably the best place to coach from. Although number one at Wimbledon, you're just above the scoreboard if you're a coach, which isn't too bad.
Is there an argument for tournaments where they've now got automated line calls that you don't actually need the umpire on the court, and they could almost speak to a kind of Wizard of Oz video in the
From
sky
behind the curtain.
as they kind of have a TV. Yeah, you kind of have the umpire kind of on the screen. The player has to request the umpire to have a conversation about a decision. Maybe less prominent in clay, but on a hard court, I mean, what are they there for other than to kind of calm things down if it's not going crazy? They don't normally help with that either.
I think, and Calvin, your opinion may differ, but I think you've got to an extent, try and keep the professional game looking like the game you can play on an amateur court. Now, that's obviously not possible. And actually, you could argue that not having line judges means it's even more like playing park tennis, albeit you've got automatic Hawkeye. And I just think if you then took the umpire off the court altogether, I don't know. I haven't thought about it before. George, Calvin, what do you think?
It's a good question. I don't really have an opinion on that, really. I don't think you can have the umpire off the court. I mean, you could ask, does he need to be on a chair? Because
the chair initially was to overrule line calls, presumably. That's the main thing, to have a better vantage point than the line judges, particularly on the serve. But if you're taking that aspect out of the game, they don't really need to be on the court at all, in my opinion.
No, that's a good point.
Crikey, so we're not even going to get them in a trapeze. I'm relishing the idea of Maria Chicak. I think you stick them in
a VAR-style box, almost. But
I don't think that. You could just have them on the side of the court, just further back from the players and just in a normal chair.
Like a supervisor, just sitting in the alleys.
I think that's basically all they're going to become then, isn't it? I mean, there's other things that, like code violations and time violations and that kind of thing they need to be on the court for.
Probably safer for them to call that from a VAR room. They could just the players to a degree. No risk of balls being hit in their face or aggressive
Did you see
chair hitting.
Speaking of umpires getting hit, did you see Tommy Paul hit, I think it was Fergus Murphy, in warm-up with a serve? Like, clean off the... I mean, maybe he must have framed it, but like it didn't deflect. He hit a serve, and it landed in Fergus Murphy's face. Like, on the top of the chair.
Yeah.
Like... even in warm up, I think I wouldn't necessarily be that bad. Gave me hope, to be honest. Anyway, we're not going to get umpires off court anytime soon, I suspect. But it is interesting, especially now, because, and I don't know, this may have passed me by because it was announced while I was on holiday. The US Open have said they're going to allow video review for things like not up and those on court decisions, which kind of. A debate that was sparked partly by Andy Murray and Sharon Thurlow at the US Open last year. I mean, where that's possible, right? We think that's a good idea. There's no way this is a bad decision, is it?
No, but I like that. I think it's ludicrous that we were all sitting around watching the replay saying that definitely bounced twice, and it will probably inspire certain players to be a bit more honest about it, I imagine, rather than pretending they didn't feel it. Which... As I've said before, I can remember one moment in my entire life where I genuinely was certain I'd got it, and the person was certain it hadn't happened. Every other time, I either know and haven't told them, or I've known and told them, depending on what mood I'm in.
So you've either cheated or you haven't cheated, is what you're saying. Right, okay. Good to know. The other thing I would just say is I'm quite surprised, and look, to each their own, quite surprised Andy say he likes sitting in that sort of umpire's chair position. Because I've always hated the whole sort of like head thing. I'd much rather be kind of behind the gunner, and I think you get a much better appreciation of the way they hit the ball. I mean, that's why the Royal Box is where it is, because like that's the best seat in the house. But I suppose also you don't get the chance to sit there very often. Yeah.
No, I'm with you. I have sat. I sat once on a corporate press thing, pretty close to the umpire's chair, quite low, and my neck did hurt at the end of the match. You saw a lot of interesting things that were different, and it was Federer playing actually, so it was quite a good one to kind of see a bit more up close from that angle. Just his suave passing the ball to ball kids, etc., which was a very underrated skill. He made that look incredibly easy. But yeah, I think broadly speaking, for actual good matches where going toe to toe and you don't want to break your neck behind the court, slightly higher. I prefer it up a little bit as well, rather than too down, right close to the action.
The problem is that you can't do that. You can't sort of say that's the standard position, because a lot of the tournaments, outdoor tournaments on the outside courts, don't have don't have seats behind.
Yeah, that's true.
So you
got to be on the
would
side.
need a universal position, I think, for the umpire. But I mean, like I say, I always prefer to watch behind, but specifically at outdoor tournaments, you can't watch from behind. It has to be from the side.
The other position that really sticks out in my mind, and Stuart Fraser once showed me this. This is again another kind of weird press perk that's now been banished into the distant past. But there was do you remember the old French Open court? It was almost like the bull ring. Do you know
Is
what
that
I
the
mean?
one they replaced with the rainforest court?
Yeah, so they moved that kind of further down, and so there was a last year of that there. And as journalists, you could kind of go. There were press seats on the court, but they split out where the cameramen were next to it. So you went down into kind of the cameraman pit. And if you ever get a chance to, which most people will not get the chance to do this, but if you ever get a chance to go into a cameraman pit to watch a match, is a fascinating angle. So you're kind of watching.
You're at ankle level, right?
Yeah, so sometimes they do try and do it sometimes in some of the coverage, so you can kind of see the spin of the ball, but it's a fascinating view. And then the balls are actually like coming down at you, like cameramen. It's a dangerous job. Those balls are flying down there all the time.
Who was it? I mean, it happened at Wimbledon, right? Like someone hit a ball away and it hit a camera person, it hit a camera operator, and they're like very lucky not to get defaulted. I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but anyway. It's a story for another day. Right, I've got another listener comment, and then we're going to get on to Cincinnati. But I like to put your questions first because it's your podcast in the end. Heather says, and it's really more a comment than a question, but I think I've got some questions about it. Heather says on email again, I found your discussion on the transgender issues in tennis really interesting, but wonder why this is being treated as something new when in fact the same issues occurred in the 1970s when Renee Richards tried to enter the US Open. I think various court cases she did eventually win the right to compete there, but I don't remember anything else about her career other than she coached Martina Navratilova at some stage. It would be interesting to see if any of the issues people are concerned about at the moment were around when Renee Richards was fighting for her right to play, and see how and if they were resolved. Love the podcast, Heather. I mean, it is a really interesting point and kind of one that doesn't get brought up very much. And my guess, and please sort of correct me on this, is that in the 1970s, trans people weren't really given much recognition overall. So when Renee Richards turned up, I suppose she was almost not a novelty, but people were like, well, first of all, what's a trans woman? I don't understand this. And second of all, then kind of dealing with all the issues around it. There wasn't maybe the scientific research into advantages that people who've been through male puberty may or may not have. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Calvin, I appreciate that the 1970s is too early, really, even for you, but you might be more familiar with the Renee Richards story than we perhaps are.
I'm not familiar. I'm not overly familiar. There is a documentary about it. When ESPN did a load of sports documentaries about 10 years ago called 30 for 30, all of which are excellent. There's one called Renee. You can get them. Some of them are on YouTube. It's one of the original ones. So I think you may be able to get it on YouTube, or you can get them in certain places. But it's quite a decent one. There's also one on Chris Evert and Martin Navratilova's rivalry as well. But so everything I know was on about that case was on that documentary. But it was probably 10 years ago that I watched it.
Well, maybe that's one for, as we did with the Guillermo Villegas documentary, one for us to watch in the off-season and maybe discuss a little bit, because, it came out in 2011, and, probably is worth revisiting and having a think about as a different kind of aspect to this trans story. That there have been a lot of other comments and emails, and I can't read them all out, but thanks so much for everyone who's got in touch. And I'd also just like to say thank you for everyone who's been really respectful about it. And just sort of not just sending us messages about dying and, telling us to, no abuse. Well, there's been some abuse. George, I shield you from a lot of
That's
this.
so nice. I'm a vulnerable flower.
But mostly it's been people kind of saying, I don't agree with you. This is why I don't agree with you. But, that's kind of what this podcast's all about, I suppose. You can have opinions. That's what we try and do. Yeah. But thanks, Heather, for your.
And we're wrong
remarks.
very often, by the way.
I mean, we're almost always
issue,
wrong.
But as we'll come on to with Calvin's opinions later.
I'm still not wrong on that. It's based on 2 weeks. We'll see.
Right. Well, let's dive straight into that, and let's maybe start with a question from Marianne, who asks: Coco Gauff is having a great summer in the US. Is this the Brad Gilbert influence? Yes, you are right, Marianne. She is having a great summer in the US. She finally got a win after 7 consecutive defeats and 14 consecutive sets lost to Iga Swiatek. She finally beat her on Saturday, 7-6, 3-6, 6-4, before then going on and beating French Open finalist Karolina Muchova to win the biggest title of Coco Gauff's career at the age of 19. Her in Cincinnati, lifting that. I quite like the trophy, actually, the sort of weird vase thing. I know the Masters trophies often divide opinion, but I quite like it. Calvin, we've been teeing you up for this for a while. She's got Brad Gilbert in the box, and she has now gone and had, well, certainly the best summer that I can remember her having, maybe since her breakthrough. She got to the final in Washington, quarterfinals in Canada, and now winning the title in Cincinnati. A masterstroke.
I mean, when I said what I said a few weeks ago, I wasn't including Brad Gilbert in that.
No.
It was specifically that she'd gone and hired a young hitter, basically, as coach. And that's what I disagreed with. Now you put Brad Gilbert in the mix. He's a very, very smart tactical mind. That's a different entity altogether. He's a proven coach. So that undoubtedly will be a good move. I still think there is some issues technically in her game, specifically on her forehand. And I don't know about Brad Gilbert's technical coaching. And I still think that those things will keep preventing her at the minute winning the majors that we thought she would win.
You sort of just alluded to it there. I was going to say, where do you rank Brad Gilbert among kind of? I mean,
tactically, he's right up there, or he was. It's a weird one. He hasn't really coached anybody for a good few years now, but he obviously still knows how to look at a tennis match and see holes in players' games and that kind of thing, and use of weapons, exploiting opponents' errors. But in terms of at his best, when he was working with Agassi and then Roddick, and to a lesser degree Murray, he was right up there as one of the best 2 or 3 coaches in the world. But it's been a long time out of the game.
I think what's interesting is just listening to the way Coco Gauff's been talking this week. Sorry, George, I know you want to come in, but I just kind of wanted to say that, it feels like as much as the technical stuff, which you can't fix overnight, there's been like a mindset change. I think like the forehand became a dominating issue for everyone talking about Coco Gauff, and also probably Coco Gauff herself. And she talked a lot after beating Swiatek about her warrior mindset and how she just had to keep telling herself, I'm Coco Gauff and I can do this and I can do that. And that's pretty hard to do when you're 14-0 in sets against Iga Swiatek. And she said something quite funny in her press conference after. She said, no offense to Gael Monfils, but I did not want that record like the Novak Gael Monfils record. Djokovic obviously having beaten him 19-0. She says, but it feels really good. It wasn't necessarily like her as a player. I think it was just the moment playing players like her. Gives me confidence that I have the ability. She's a 4-time Grand Slam champion. And number one, it shows I can be at that level or compete with that level at least. I mean, this is a huge step for Coco Gauff in her head, isn't it, George?
Yeah, it is. And I think, the comment you've made there about her kind of, knowing she's Coco Gauff and keep going is quite an interesting comment to unpick, in the sense that I don't think we've ever really, well, I don't think we've aired it anyway if we have thought this, but I've never really doubted necessarily her application or wanting of being a kind of top player. I think, she's come up in a fairly man-made ideal way of being like bedded into the international tennis scene and always being kind of ready for stardom, and felt she can kind of handle it in some ways. I suppose what maybe we have been questioning is whether it's that application's then been done in the right way in terms of how smart she's been tackling her problems. You can do the same thing over and over and over again and still be trying really, really hard, but if you're not addressing the fundamental issues or training smart or fixing problems, that's not actually going to get you to where you want to go. So I think, this new voice from Brad, and, we don't really know exactly who's doing what in terms of this scene, maybe the hitter will be a bit more of a Jamie Delgado figure in Murray's career, for example. And then they'll always kind of have that outside voice providing a bit more tactical awareness or whatever. Who knows? It's always a bit difficult to kind of cast judgment on a team when we're not kind of that close to it. But I think this was a huge result and not really one I'd seen coming a month ago. I thought we might be waiting a couple of years before Gauff made this breakthrough. And I think as important as anything is she then actually went on and won the title. Like, there's so many times that the players do actually get over what you consider to be a pretty significant hump and then feel
get
a bit
that
flat
big kind
and
of
deflated
adrenaline
afterwards.
dump. Yeah, exactly.
And, I think Gauff, the biggest thing that felt like it was standing in the way of her success was the strength of Swiatek and potentially Rybakina and Sabalenka as well. Like, it was hard to see where she was going to really make great gains in some of those matchups with some of the deficiencies she has. I'm still not necessarily convinced right now. I'm talking about Gauff winning the US Open, but this was a big mental shift for her to believe she can win these matches, even if Swiatek is probably treating it as I've got nothing left in the tank, as we'll probably come on to.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what she said, isn't it? That she felt she didn't have a lot left. I was just trying to dig out how many matches she's actually played this year. I mean, this is a problem, right? Like, if you keep winning, then you will play a lot of matches. I think it's also probably worth noting that Iga Swiatek has just signed a major deal with Visa. She's got a couple of new sponsorship deals this year, which I think is not a coincidence. She's also working with IMG now, who, as we know, are the kind of management behemoth of the sports world. They also, that you join IMG because you want to make more money. Like, that is the reality of it. They're very good at that, and they don't really apologise for it. But you can't just make more money out of the same thing. If you want to make more money, you're going to have to commit more days to sponsors, to doing those kind of things. And I'm not going to sit here and say she's doing too many photo shoots and that kind of thing, because I think there's an air of misogyny to that. But, of course she's tired. Like, she's played 81 matches in the last 52 weeks, which is that's Dominic team levels. That is a lot. And, she probably is committed to those tournaments and doesn't, if she wins 3 in a row and she said, I'm going to go and play here or there, I imagine she's the type of person who wants to follow through on that commitment. And I think the probably double-edged sword of it is that she's probably negotiated quite good appearance fee to do it as well, because of where she is now in her career, and deserves it, frankly, but also because of who she's working with and the way we know that IMG works. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. And look, IMG have made a lot of people a lot of money, and, who are we to doubt them? But I just wonder when comments like that come out, just look at it and think, yeah, I mean, it is a grueling part of the year, but you also have to, Calvin, we were talking about it off air in different contexts, but you have to take care of yourself in tennis, don't you? Like, that is something you have to do. And if you want to keep winning tennis matches, you have to realise what the important things are.
Yeah, absolutely. But as we were talking about off air as well, there's a line. But yeah, you do. It's an individual sport, and you've got to look after yourself. And the problem is, as we spoke about particularly with another player a lot, namely Emma Raducanu, over the last year, about you've got to be careful with how many of these marketing deals you do, because again, I don't know whether all of our listeners have heard me talk about this before, is that basically the partnerships that you sign, they will ask for a certain number of days. And it's full days. So the more that the more commercial deals that you sign up for, the more of your days you're giving away. And for tennis players in particular, those days are not particular fun. They're days where you're not training, and they're long days that you don't particularly enjoy, and they're not, they eat into your time off. And when you're talking about players not having much of an off season, I'd say about 2/3 of their off season tends to be, or their days off at that level will tend to be taken up by days for their commercial partners. And that could be anything those days. They could be, usually shooting adverts or something like that, which there's a lot of sitting around, but it's very stressful and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's not black and white, but there's flip side of that. They make a hell of a lot of money for doing it.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting that Iga Swiatek has talked before about how even her days off don't feel like days off. Like, during tournaments, even if you're not playing a match, you're still training and thinking about tennis. And it's still exhausting.
Yeah.
And we are also in the middle of this really grueling bit of the calendar where you play Montreal and Cincinnati back to back. And I haven't got in front of me exactly how many there were, but there was a section of the men's draw where basically someone got to the third round without anyone else in the bracket completing a match, because it's just they were dropping like flies. Cincinnati is a hot, humid place. It was particularly hot and humid, and they turned up from Toronto and basically were all absolutely knackered as far as I can tell, George.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think in kind of Swiatek's defence as well, I mean, you would say that the tennis has still been very good this year on the whole. I mean, she's arguably been a victim of her own success in that this year's not been as good as last year so far, but it's been by no means a disaster, has it? I mean, she's still, I suppose that comparing to Raducanu, it felt like, and this is always a bit of an unfair dual kind of parallel look at things, being like, oh, she's been doing all this off-court stuff and her on-court stuff's been terrible since the US Open. There's been all sorts of other factors in there as well, I'm sure, but Swiatek, the slight dip I would almost put down as much to players like Sabalenka and Rybakina getting better this year and challenging her more at bigger events than necessarily her getting that much worse. Just really hard to maintain that kind of extra 0.5% she was at last year.
Yes, sorry. You finished your sentence out of the blue there, George. I thought you were off on one. Calvin.
I think it's an interesting thing you said there, James, as well, is it's not just the days that you're not playing, you're not thinking about it. And I personally have tried to manage myself on this, and again, not very well, is that, I have days where I know I'm just burnt out from spending too much time around tennis. I'll have a day off and I'll spend hours looking at ATP live score and live rankings and that kind of thing, and texting people going, oh, did you see so-and-so's won today? And I'll even sometimes find myself watching live streams of random challenger doubles matches. And it does weigh down. It's not, it's like I say, it's something that I personally have tried to manage, and I'm only a coach. I'm not a player at the very elite level of the game. So it doesn't, they're no different though. I know some of those players and they're the same. That's what they're doing. It's not like you just, and to be honest, that's why they're as good as they are as well. That you don't just switch off from it. It's not like another job where you go on holiday for 2 weeks and you don't think about your job in that time, because everything else that's going on during that time is actually affecting you. Other people winning matches, other people winning tournaments, it's affecting your ranking and that kind of thing.
I have to say, I can completely relate to this from the press side of things as well. I mean, sometimes I'm thinking, I'm going to have a real down period and kind of switch off, not be bothered, and then some massive story will be done about kind of doping or, players dancing around with their tops off in COVID or whatever. And, because it never stops. I mean, the season just never stops. It's not like the Premier League where it feels like, you can just about deal with that September to May, etc. And then you've got a good kind of 3-month block, a bit of pre-season, etc. But tennis is just so relentless, and it's so many different hours of the day. You can watch it basically 24/7 if you want to. It's going on everywhere, and there's always a story or something going on, or it's an interesting result, or a new player to watch out for, or it's kind of been like plugged into the matrix. You can get a bit obsessive about it if you're not careful.
Yeah, it's very hard. I mean, I took the longest break of my career this summer, 3.5 weeks, and I still soldiered through and did the podcast, and it meant I was still keeping half an eye on it. But it's so hard to really unplug because, half the people I follow on Twitter are tennis people, half the people I follow on Instagram are tennis people, so you're always exposed to it. And yeah, I have to say, it's one thing Iga Swiatek's been very good about talking very openly about, and probably, credit to her, we wouldn't be having this conversation in such frank terms if it wasn't for people like her. But that all said, we're going to talk about tennis. I feel much less pleased with the idea that I'm going to nominate Iga Swiatek as my US Open favourite, as I did on Renee Stubbs' show last week, having heard her speak like that, because she's someone who's always said she finds the US Open very hard anyway. New York is a tough place. she's someone who gets quite overstimulated. She likes being in nature. There's not a huge amount of opportunity to do that in New York. It's a very stimulating place. So I'm kind of looking at it and going, if I was not Iga Swiatek, i.e. everyone else in the field, I would look at that defeat and what she said and go, there is an opportunity here. It is wide open. It's incredible that the US Open's only a week away. I can't quite believe it as well. I haven't even started building the fantasy spreadsheet, George. That's how on the hoof I've been caught. But don't worry, I've got a day off tomorrow and I'm going to sit at the cricket with my laptop like a tragic and build it. Anyway, yes, congrats to Coco Gauff, really. She's up to 6 in the world now, 2 short of her career high of 4 by virtue of winning that Masters title. George?
And I think I saw something saying she'd been in the top 10 for 50 straight weeks or something, which is no mean feat for a 19-year-old.
Yeah. I wonder who's got, I'm assuming it won't be Gauff, but I wonder who's got the most weeks in the top 10 before the age of 20. Yeah, that's that's who I think probably it is. But if anyone's got that stat, or if Jeff Sackman is listening, it feels like the man who's probably got that at his fingertips, then I would be fascinated to know. Or maybe I'll get in touch with the ITF and see if they know. Anyway, let's move on to the men's, because we've managed to get 35 minutes into this podcast without talking about what was a thoroughly epic final. And that is an overused word in sport, and I don't think it's inappropriate in this particular context. I was complaining to George that it was a 4-hour match, and he said, I think 4-hour finals are fine, and he's absolutely right. Novak Djokovic bounced back from losing Wimbledon, from losing the first set, from going a set down in the second set, from appearing to be on the point of fainting in the second set at one point, to win in 3 sets and nearly 4 hours. He said, tough to describe. It's definitely one of the toughest matches I've ever played in my life, regardless what tournament, what category, what level, what player. From the beginning until the end, we've been through so much, so many ups and downs, highs and lows, incredible points, poor games, heat strokes, coming back. I don't know where to start with this. Calvin, give us your overall impression of the match.
I didn't watch it all because it was pretty late.
Said you fell asleep during the third set, is that right?
Yeah, I did, yeah. In fact, I didn't realise until I knew that Djokovic had won, I didn't realise the score. I thought he'd just won with the one break when I woke up this morning. But it was an interesting one. It's a strange one because it was very, very good level. There's no question about that. But at the same time, I don't think we actually learned anything new about it at all. It was kind of the match that you'd expect them to play, and I'll expect them to play again. And I think they'll play a lot of matches like that in the next 18 months, and they'll probably win close to the same amount, unless Alcaraz goes up a level. I don't see Djokovic going up a level. I think this is where he's at now. But yeah, it was kind of like, as George pointed out earlier in our WhatsApp group, or James did, it was a bit Nadal Djokovic slugfest, which is fine. When you watch it once and twice, both the matches we've seen have been great. It'll get to a stage where some people like it. George says he likes it. It's not really for me, where they'll play like, when we're 10 matches in and it's the same thing of basically them both going toe-to-toe from the baseline. What I think we can notice, what's noticeable in it, is that Alcaraz is the first player that's the first player of this new generation, in inverted commas, or basically any generation since Djokovic, Federer, Nadal, Murray, that fully backs himself to beat Djokovic from the baseline and fully believes that he will beat him. You get some guys who think that they can beat him if they play their best or if he's off. It doesn't seem to bother Alcaraz. He just thinks that he's going to beat him from the baseline. He doesn't have to change his game at all. He's going to play his game and he backs his game against him. And that stands out. Whereas there's been so many other guys who you can see they just don't think they're going to win unless they play lights out.
I think for me, the new thing in inverted commas that we saw from this match, and this will probably sound a little bit ridiculous given who this guy is, but I do think it's quite an important point at this stage of his career, is that Djokovic isn't going away. I do think there was something about Wimbledon losing it that way, knowing Alcaraz is only likely to get stronger and stronger, that does kind of put a bit of added pressure on, I'm on the way down. This guy's on the way up. How long can I kind of stick with him? And I think Calvin's right there to say Djokovic's level ain't improving. I think Alcaraz's tennis is already much better than Djokovic's is now, which feels a bit weird when you're just watching Djokovic lose that match. But if you look at what Alcaraz can do on the court in terms of technically speed, agility, and everything else, I think he's at a higher level than Novak is now. But Novak is still a kind of Behemoth of kind of mental strength and tennis know-how that will keep him in matches. And he's still a bloody brilliant tennis player as well. But if it was Novak at 28 versus Alcaraz now, I'd probably be backing Novak comfortably at the moment. But it's just at that point of kind of physically waning slightly, and he's lost that. It's fractional, and he'll beat everyone else in the world. But Alcaraz is good enough to come and take it the other way. So I think it was quite an important win for Djokovic from that perspective, because the other angle is, you could say he's not actually beaten Alcaraz before that match, really. I mean, that French Open one was Alcaraz kind of dying after the second set. I think there was something for Novak about coming through a bit of a close one against Alcaraz. I don't know how much it changes from my view of who wins the US Open, because Novak does have a tendency to go a bit loopy at this tournament and doesn't normally kind of get the job done. But I'm feeling a little bit more bullish on his chances than I was a couple of weeks ago.
I mean, it's so on a knife edge, isn't it? Like that I'm not sure it. Yeah, a bit like Calvin said, I'm not sure we do learn anything from it, because Alcaraz, he served for the match in the second, or was within. No, he was 4-2 up in the second, so he was within 2 games of it.
And a match point in the tiebreak as well.
Yeah, match point in the breaker, saved 4 match points before Djokovic got over the line. Like, Djokovic served for the match and didn't serve it out. So it's just ridiculously on a knife edge, to the extent that I think, you play that match 100 times, it probably goes 50-50. What I think is really interesting is the physical side of it, because I think the first 3 games, it took Djokovic maybe 3 games or 4 games to hit a winner. And that suggested to me that he was in kind of that lockdown tiebreak mode where he just doesn't hit unforced errors, and that he maybe thought he could, pull some kind of physical problems or nerve problems out of Alcaraz by playing like that. And actually, turns out it was Djokovic who ended up struggling physically.
I still think that is the weirdest thing about the Wimbledon final, was the tiebreak he played in the second set. That was so un-Djokovic. So to kind of see him come back and win 2 tiebreaks in how we'd normally expect him to be in those moments this time was potentially a little bit reassuring for him as well, because that was a very kind of peculiar set of circumstances at Wimbledon. I mean, it in terms of the slugfest stuff, I mean, I love it, as Calvin sort of said. I know it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but I personally always preferred watching the bigger Nadal-Djokovic matches than I did the Nadal-Federer ones. Like, I think they're more closely matched at the same things, which it feels a weird thing to say, because it's like good styles do make good matches, but I think there's something quite thrilling about 2 players it's impossible to kind of get the ball past, who do freakishly incredible physical things for such a long time, hitting the ball so well, just complete opposite of my own personal game, where I'd just be dead after 5 minutes of trying to run like that, and you'd be like, you can just have it, mate.
George there with his, I prefer world cinema, and definitely preferred Radiohead before they were famous.
I mean, I recently sang Radiohead at karaoke night, so I'm all for contrarianism. I mean, Calvin, as mentioned, you're the one who doesn't like those Djokovic Nadal slugfests. I mean, this is more than that, isn't it? Or at least different, or at least to your tastes.
No, it's not that I don't like them. I really enjoyed. I've really enjoyed Nadal and Djokovic playing. I don't just like watching the same point over and over again for match after match after match. I think you've got to have some sort of variation in there, and I think it got to if you took, the famous Djokovic-Nadal Australian Open, if that was the only one they played, or if you'd have just taken an hour of that, it was phenomenal level, and the level was great. It's just not something I want to watch over and over again. It's the same point over and over again. It's like, go back to music again. I don't I play guitar. I love guitar music. I don't want to see somebody do a 30-minute guitar solo though, because it's like just feels like right. We've done. Are we doing this for another 20 minutes then? Like it's like, and that's just my position on it. But it's personal preference. It's I'd happily watch them play. If they played US Open final, I'd tune in to watch it. If they're playing, Miami final in 8 months' time, and it's the same type of thing, and they've already played 6 times between then and now, I'm not sure I'll be, eager to sit and watch it again. I think it's a bit of a concern.
I'd watch them play table tennis in a car park, to be honest.
But I think it's a bit of a concern, though, that we're talking about US Open, just no one else is going to win it, are they? It's one of those two. Okay. And that could make for a pretty boring tournament. And George is going to come in with Medvedev here. I know he is, or maybe Dominic Thiem.
Well, I was going to say, I think Medvedev can beat Djokovic. I don't think Medvedev can beat Alcaraz.
Medvedev's been crap since the clay, though.
I still think he can beat Djokovic at the US
There's
Open.
no way he's beating Djokovic. As it is now, there's no way he's beating him. He's way off form. And Medvedev's good when he's on form. He tends to go on these streaky runs of form where he's difficult to beat. But I think there's a chance Alcaraz might have broken him though.
Can I guess what more I'm saying is I think there's individuals, not many, admittedly, who can beat one of them, but not win the tournament.
No, I do see where George is coming from there. I do think that in good form, I'd even make it a 50-50 with Medvedev and Djokovic on an American hard court. But as it is now, he's just in no sort of form. And when he does, he tends to work in seasons, Medvedev, doesn't he? If you split the season up between, the Australian season, then the American hard court swing, the clay, the grass, the American hard court swing again, the indoor season, he tends to just hit form in like 1 or 2 of those, and it hasn't happened. So I think he might even lose before getting to Djokovic. Or he's going to be seeded. What's he going to get seeded? Is he going to get seeded? He's going to be top. He's going to be 8th, isn't he? 8th seed.
Mevedev.
Yeah.
He's going to be the 3rd seed, actually.
Oh, is he? Right. Okay.
Well,
he's not
3
making semis. I don't think he'll make the semis.
Just on the other side of the coin, like the sort of Alcaraz emotional side, he was very emotional afterwards. He spoke kind of quite movingly about his brother who was there to watch him and how much he looked up to him. His brother looks like sort of Carlos Alcaraz from a sort of another universe where he ends up in like a college buddy movie. But anyway, that's not the end of that. And, we saw him being very jovial with Novak and joking about looking up to him and enjoying it. And what I find fascinating, and Calvin, I kind of wanted to bounce this off you, is how, a lot of these guys, we've always criticised them for being so, kind of reverent and matey with Novak, and how it's actually held them back in terms of trying to, break him down. But Alcaraz seems to be able to flick that switch to go from like stone cold killer on the court to like mates with the greatest player of all time. And I wonder if that's like a mindset you've encountered in players before, or whether it's something that some people just have or don't, or whether it's something you can practice. Like how do you learn to flick that switch?
I don't know if it's a switch. It's just personalities. I think that some people have to live that. It's like a character that you play sometimes, that you turn on in a match. Right, this is the character that I am in the match. And they can be phenomenally competitive. Like Federer was a phenomenal competitor in matches, like hated losing. But I think it didn't kind of go... It's a bit different from when you kind of think of like... you kind of think of like Roy Keane, who everyone sees as being like that all the time. Whereas when you listen to his teammates, they say he's a great laugh. But it's the kind of character that you put on, and he's kind of exacerbated that for the way that he does his punditry now. But that, that people can separate it. But then you get other people who are like that all the time. It's just how they have to be. And it's not a character. It's not a character thing. It's just how they have to be. I know tennis players who are like that. I don't really want to say who they are because to be honest, to behave like that, you've got to be a bit of a dickhead. And they are. But you get some people who are, you get some people who are like they are on court, off court, and you get some people who are not. And I don't think it's necessarily, although it can be flicking a switch, it's just what they tend to be like.
I think this one feels wider than sport to me as well. I mean, I can think of plenty of people in just like a normal working environment who their whole life is work. They're not bothered about kind of having the relationships around it. They're very driven. They're very, that's what they want to do. That's it. They're not interested in that kind of relationship side of things. And you get the similar people with similar drive who will be very kind of friendly, chatty, want to kind of have conversations. There's not, and they've still got same ambitions, same success, just, one's a bit of twat, the other one's not, I guess. Like,
I don't think,
from
though,
a personal perspective, but like, they just section it off as like.
I don't think though that I don't think Alcaraz is even like that on court though. Like he's pretty easygoing on court. He's just very, very energetic. But you've seen him on court. He has a laugh with opponents on court and that kind of thing. You see him on the practice court. Like he always seems to be having a laugh and that kind of thing. Whereas some people refuse to do that, and for the right reasons. They don't think this is not something I can do here. I have to be like this. And Djokovic is a bit like that, I think. But Medvedev's very much like it. Off court, Medvedev's very, very easygoing, very eloquently spoken, smart, intelligent. Got a lot to say about a lot of things. Whereas on court, he tends to be very, he's angry all the time, pretty one-dimensional. So,
it is a real switch. I mean, you would kind of maybe say the same about Holger Rune. Like from the times that I've met him or dealt with him off the court, he's quite funny, and he's actually come across as quite shy when like having met him in sort of more informal circumstances.
I disagree with that.
Well, I mean, I
don't know. I don't know him that well, but the people I know who know him wouldn't echo those things. I think that's another thing you can do as well. You can put a bit of an act for
a game face, for media or exactly.
And that's, I think, what some people, like I say, I don't know Holger Rune personally, but I know people who do know him, and that's not the vibe that I get.
Thank you. So, Calvin, your prediction, I mean, you've kind of hinted at it, but if these two meet in the US Open final, based on what you've seen, who would you predict without having seen them play anything in New York yet?
I'd still favour Alcaraz,
I
think, because I think fundamentally, he should have won last night. No, it wasn't one of those that he's going to be gutted, but I think if you put them, I think that was probably quite a par performance for both of them. That's kind of where they're at. I think that was both kind of like, I think it was kind of like 8.5 out of 10 for both of them.
Yeah.
And I think that if they played that exact same match with both playing 8.5 out of 10, 10 times, I think Alcaraz would win it 6. Now, Alcaraz might play better than that. He might play worse. Djokovic might play better, might play worse. But I think even in the second set tiebreak, I think that was right on a knife edge. And I think, like, for example, there was a point where, don't know whether it was the match point, where Alcaraz stuck up the 2 lobs. And the first lob wasn't a very good one, and Djokovic hit a shaky smash on it. The second one was a good one, and Djokovic hit a great smash on it. Now, Djokovic doesn't often hit great smashes. So if he'd have netted that or hadn't put it away, there's a chance that Alcaraz, I think, would have won the match. But as it happened, Djokovic hit a shot that he doesn't normally hit that well to win the match. So it could easily have been 5-6 Alcaraz. And we'd be talking about a good match, and we'd be saying he's got Djokovic's number, without a doubt. And it was only like a matter of inches that made the difference.
That was possibly the best smash I think I've ever seen Novak.
It was a phenomenal smash from where he was in the court. I mean, they tend not to get, those kind of smashes you never get praised for, because the only smashes smash is a weird one that you normally get criticised for missing them, but no one ever says anything when you make them. But that one, with how high it went and how deep he was in the court, to time that is so difficult. and he did it brilliantly. And he's not a great smasher, like we said. If Nadal had done that, you'd have thought, yeah, he does that all the time. But Djokovic, not so much.
No necessarily comments required, but my other notes from the match involved almost constant shouts from the crowd, Hawkeye losing its mind and calling balls that were bouncing in the middle of the court out, Djokovic screaming creatine to his box when he was going through something physically. Turns out he's not using like pulverized pigeon scrotum in water or something. It's just what everyone else uses. Just there was so much going on. Like, it was such a rich tapestry of a match, so much drama, and also the shadow. Like, it was actually Petch who pointed out on commentary that while Djokovic was off having a really long toilet break, he's like, well, he'll walk back as slowly as he can so that shadow keeps moving across the court because he just needs the shadow. And like at that exact moment, the camera flicked to the corridor where Djokovic was like doing up his shoelaces as slowly as he could. I just thought it was very funny.
I think as well, like one of the things I thought was the stadium was packed, the crowd were right into it, and as much as, you know, it can go a bit the other way with American sports fans, once they fill a stadium and the drama's there, it's tough to beat the American sports fans in that kind of thing. And, you know, it reminded me just of those old sort of night matches that they had at the US Open in the 1980s and 90s. That it just seemed to be, everybody seemed to be losing their mind. Everybody there, it seemed like everybody in the stadium wanted somebody to win. And I don't know what the split was, but I think that's when you get the best stuff, is when when it's not everybody for one person and not the other. It's when you've kind of got a split of who you want to win. And that's what it seemed like. If you just looked at the crowd, like their actions and what they were doing, it wasn't just sitting and clapping thinking, oh, this is marvellous tennis. It was, we want one of these people to win.
I do think this matchup is going to be very, very important for tennis over the next 2 years. I know Calvin's kind of saying, as a tennis purist, he might get bored of this after 8 times. But I tell you what, if they keep playing 8 matches like this over the next 12 months, tennis will be in a bloody good place in men's tennis. You know, people will want to tune in to watch this. It's a big kind of heavyweight boxing match that people will be interested in and will want to see.
I think it's more of a concern, though. Yeah, they will, and that, you know, it was great last night. And people will tune in and will want to watch it. But the concern is that we're gonna have 2 weeks in New York in a week's time, basically, and we know what's going to happen at the end. That's not good for the sport. Where you don't.
I'm not sure. I don't think it's a bad thing at the minute to have 4 straight Djokovic-Alcaraz.
No, I don't.
Because he had some better semis.
I don't think that, George. I think that would be great for the sport. I'd like if there was some jeopardy on the way there, and not just there's going to be a lot. No one's going to believe no one's going to believe like Alcaraz is losing to Alex Zverev, or, you know, Casper Ruud is beating Djokovic in the semis or quarters or something. And it's just going to be them destroying people on the run-up. And even if there are good matches in the other parts of the draw, it's kind of like, yeah, they're just playing before they lose to these two. Because they are way better than everybody else at the minute.
There's probably a world, though, where you're looking at maybe the best semi lineup at the minute in terms of, okay, we're saying Medvedev's not in form, but I think a Medvedev-Djokovic semi-final on one side and probably a Sinner-Alcaraz semi on the other side. You're looking at those two matches as those are the matches I feel are most likely to lose for them individually outside of to each other.
I'll tell you what we don't want to see, though, is Alcaraz, Medvedev, Djokovic, Sinner.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I mean. I think that's kind of what we're saying here, isn't it? I think there's certain individual matches that are difficult for both of them, but they're not necessarily the same difficult match for the other.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I totally understand what you mean.
So, I mean, I think Medvedev's a very difficult match for Djokovic. It's a very easy match for Alcaraz, whereas I think Sinner's a very difficult match for Alcaraz, but it's a very easy match for Djokovic.
I see.
Kind of head-to-heads.
So there's a big sweat on the draw on Thursday, basically.
I think for all of us, it'd be quite good if we've got the 2 semis we want. But anyway, the final will save it anywhere, I'm sure.
A bit of info for people who may be wondering. The draw is on Thursday. It'll be released at 5 p.m. UK time. At least that's the expectation. It won't be live streamed. You don't get to watch it. That was a controversial thing that I found out this week. But there you go, just in case you're wondering when it might be. And of course, once the draw is done, then I can throw open the floodgates on the fantasy tennis, which may well have a clothing-related sponsor. So watch this space. That involves a prize, George. There might be a prize for the winner. So I would say prepare your wardrobe, but that's not realistic, is it?
Yeah, I was going to say, my last two fantasy slams have been so bad that I'm in a Medvedev string of terrible form, but that's probably flattering that I was ever at that high of the game. If this match had gone a bit of 5-setter, who would you have picked to win it from that position?
Djokovic, because he doesn't lose tie-breaks or 5-setters, so presumably there would have been more tie-breaks. I don't know. It is horrific.
They lost one to Alcaraz like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, but so what's his record this year? 17-1 or something absurd. I think I'd still back Djokovic, although it's hard to tell because who knows where he is physically, and that would have been a 6-hour match. If that had gone 5, it would have been a 6-hour match. And yeah, I don't know. Tricky, innit? Right, let's move on because we are running a little bit short of time and we've still got to talk about Juan Martin del Potro, which usually takes about an hour. He was, as we know, targeting the US Open for yet another comeback. And the sad news this week, he said, as you know, my desire to return to a court as special as the US Open made me very excited. I tried by all means to reach term, but my body does not accompany me 100%. This is all translated, I should say. To be able to feel comfortable and happy to share once again with you a unique moment. They also know that the pain I feel does not allow me to focus on a return. I will continue to look for the best alternatives to recover my quality of life. I thank you for the company. I just wanted to... There's not much to say from a tennis perspective, Calvin, but I just wanted to... Because you must know a lot of, retired tennis players or guys who've played to a good level. And just talking about that quality of life thing, that you must know people who played on longer than they should have done and are now struggling to play football in the park with their kids. Or I just imagine that must happen a lot to sportsmen of a certain age.
I mean, I don't even think it's played on longer than they should have done. The human body, basically, if we're honest, isn't made for elite level sport. And that's a problem. I know ex-athletes, not just in tennis, but as they get older, they're struggling, and it's... it can only be because of that. And I think if you've had a major... It's not the major injury that's the problem, I don't think. Although Del Pot's had such a unique one. He cracked his kneecap on a net post.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's any real precedent for that kind of thing. So I don't know. That must be painful all the time. But I mean, if he hasn't got good quality of life, there's absolutely zero chance that he was going to be playing tennis again. If you can't walk properly, I mean, I know there's people who have concerns about, I don't know how legit they are, or even if those people still have concerns about Murray now, that basically having the operation, not concerns, it's just that no one's ever really had the operation he's had and then come back to play elite level singles tennis. So we just don't know. You're going into kind of the unknown there as to what it's like after that to have a metal hip and then play elite level sport on it. I mean, he seems to be doing great. He doesn't look in loads of pain and that kind of thing, but I don't know.
It's other. I remember talking to, I forget which Brian brother it is that had the metal hip, Bob or Mike, but I remember talking to that one, and he was saying, well, it's not really the hip that's the problem, because the hip's fine, it's metal, it's fixed. It's how the rest of your body adapts to the way that joint moves differently, and that's why Murray ended up with back problems that really affected his second serve, and then various other, and this abdominal issue, which is 100% linked to that, I'm absolutely sure of it. So, yeah, it's one of those things. Anyway, the other couple of notes from George's excellently compiled running order. I should give him credit. I don't usually reveal that, George. I usually just make it sound like I'm incredibly well prepared. But WTA Finals, we're still not sure of the venue. We think it's going to be China because everything else is in China for the rest of the year in the WTA. And they do have the WTA Elite Trophy in Zhuhai. Anyone who can explain to me exactly what that is can have a biscuit or something.
Is it 9-16 or something?
I don't really understand.
I've got a feeling it's just the expatriate players behind.
But there's a wild card as well. I think it's 12 players and one of them's a wild card. And my thought was that if Emma Raducanu's fit, they might be quite tempted to to lump her in because it's around. I think it's around the time she could come back without sacrificing her protected ranking. So anyway, speculation, pure speculation, I assure you. The next gen finals venue hasn't been announced either. Just on a point, but George, are they trying to wait for a good day to bury bad news on both those fronts?
I don't really know. I mean, it's been such a bizarre thing this over the last few years, hasn't it? I mean, they've just basically kept announcing a venue about 6 weeks or 12 weeks before the bloody thing's actually happening, and then it was a bit of a disaster. It was Texas. It was Texas, wasn't it? Was it? I can't remember which part of Texas. Was it Houston one year?
Fort Worth.
It went
yeah.
to Mexico.
Disastrous.
Mexico, which was better.
Mexico was good.
It was good.
I was just going to say that. Like, this is one of the things that I just don't get about the WTA, and I feel like I'm always having to pop at them. But like, they had this hugely successful tournament in Mexico, and then like, right, yeah, we're never doing that again. We'll try and find somewhere else.
Give them? They gave them a 1,000-level tournament off the back of the
give
success
it them as
of that.
well.
Yeah,
Give it them as well as that. You know, like,
give it
you found a
Mexico
place.
till end of season.
Or don't give them the 1,000. Go, look, you've done a real good job of running the finals. Keep that. Like, we can do it. We can. This is an organisation that struggles to run good quality tournaments and to fill stands. They found a place where they could do it, and they're like, no, we'll do something different.
Yeah, it's baffling, isn't it? I think the reality is that someone will put up a bigger check. I mean, I still haven't got to the bottom of Fort Worth. Like that was one of the strangest things that ever happened. But presumably, was it Shenzhen who had the finals that Barty won, which was she won the biggest purse in the history of tennis.
The weirdest thing about that Fort Worth thing is because I went to Dallas earlier on in the year, which is pretty clear. I mean, Fort Worth's one of those places that kind of is Dallas and it's not Dallas. But that's a real tennis town. It's a real tennis city. It was amazing to me that if you can't make a tournament work there, there's something wrong with your marketing and your organisation. Because everyone there had a real support for tennis, even at the smaller tournament where I was at. I was speaking to people, speaking to tennis fans. They absolutely loved it. And I found it bizarre that they couldn't make that work in Fort Worth by the way, either where they put it or it wasn't marketed well enough or what have you. But also, I mean, it's pretty depressing that it's going to China, isn't it? Like, nothing's been resolved on the reason why it was taken away from China in the first place.
Yeah.
And we're here, we're just like, right, proof that the Chinese have won that. The Chinese government, their plan all along was we just not talk about it. We'll ignore it. They'll come back. And it's worked.
I was just going to say, I think, sometimes we've sort of pocketed blaming some of the players for not being consistent enough in the women's game in terms of the marketing. But Calvin's sort of touching on a broader point here that there's serious organisational deficiencies, I think, that aren't promoting these players well enough, and they're not promoting this sport well enough and not filling these stadiums well enough in what is an incredibly high level of sport. And women's sport, and I do find it just quite staggering they're not making this work, finding the cities that are going to make this work, and it just feels a bit too rigid as well. I think we talk a lot about WTA and ATP aligning, but actually WTA purely trying to emulate the ATP in some respects might not actually be the best strategy for growing that market. You could concentrate things in countries or cities, or move it around a lot less and kind of build up a fan base in certain areas. For example, there's a lot of things that could happen outside the box if this isn't working at the minute. Or ultimately, you can just join the two together and make it the Uber product we all like. But I think that'll take about 15 years contractually.
So we're going to to unpick all of the different contracts they've got with all the different people in the world.
Commit to it now, and it would probably take 15 years. So the reality then is that
it'd be like Brexit.
Yeah. It would be exactly like I'd be like, yeah, we're going to do this, and then it's like 15 years to actually deliver it. By the time you get there, it'd be like, oh,
we've all forgotten why we did it in the first place. Yeah.
I think as well, though, it's like they'll end up going chasing the money again, and it's like probably end up in Saudi Arabia at some stage, I would think. But that won't help the game. No one will go. They don't fill the stadiums there. Like, you look at the boxing and stuff, there's no atmosphere.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any of the football there. I don't know if that's any different, but you can't compare tennis to football anyway. But it's not growing the game. You get some more money and you'll get paid a bit more in the short term. But you're not growing the game.
Indeed. Yeah, they always say grow the game. It's total nonsense. But anyway. Right, I have two final bits of business. One, Stefanos Tsitsipas asked for someone to be kicked out in Cincinnati because she was imitating a bee when he was about to serve. It begs the question, what's the weirdest reason a tennis match has ever been stopped? I'm struggling to beat that at the moment, unless anyone has. I mean, Calvin, I reckon the Futures Tour's got some weird stuff going on.
I once saw the umpire stop a tennis match because one of the players was just so bad. That was like when it wasn't the umpire, sorry, it was a referee, because obviously the tournaments grant wildcards, and in theory they can grant them to whoever they want. And there was a tournament in Greece where it was quite obvious that somebody had paid for a wild card that they just wanted to play in the tournament, because the guy came on with like a carrier bag and 2 rackets. He paid for the game himself in the tournament, couldn't pay for himself a tennis bag. And he started the match. I remember it was when I was going, and I think I'd seen the score. It was a lad who I knew, an American lad who Luke, who I coach, had played doubles with before, and he'd won the match 30-love retired. And I remember I thought, what's gone on there? And then when I got there, Luke had told me, basically that they'd warmed up, and it was obvious the guy was rubbish. And the first 2 points, then the tournament referee had come down and said, no, this is not continuing. Like this is not. We have to like uphold sporting integrity, and this isn't doing it. So they basically stopped, because I mean, imagine that being the only player that a match has ever been stopped for. You're not good enough to play in it. That's
wave it
rough,
off. Stop the fight.
But the one with Tsitsipas was. It's like you said, James. It was scarcely believable, because I mean, it was ridiculous anyway. But then, like, did you see the people who he was referring to? It was like a bunch of old ladies. Like, it's not like if it was say it was a group of like lads in Australia on like court 13 or something, like with some some cans. You'd think it was like, yeah, this is possible. But that was just like 3 3 ladies in their 50s and 60s.
At least one of them was called Sandra, like guaranteed.
Yeah.
Like I don't know their names, but you
and
can
he was
guarantee
accusing them
that.
of making bee noises to put him off serving. He is genuinely nuts. Like,
Also,
he's genuinely insane.
Well, I think he might not have been. I think he might have been telling the truth, but when it comes out of Stefanos Tsitsipas's mouth, you're like, this is, it's up there with like, this gentleman has filled my box with his towels. Like, it was the same kind of genre of comment.
I swear he was swatting to start with as well. It was certainly a genuine belief it was a bee at first. I was going to say,
I don't think it was true. I think he'd imagined it. I do think he's genuinely insane.
I'm sure the woman apologises to him in the clip.
And there are people like pointing, saying it's her. But yeah, it was really weird.
I was going to say, your question, James, was like, what's the weirdest thing to happen? I think the question should be, what weird things could happen next? We've gone Cotton Eye Joe last week, Fuzzy Bee this week. What on earth is a match going to be halted for?
Yeah, watch out,
the US Open?
Winston-Salem. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really don't know, but I look forward to it.
The Cotton Eye Joe one was phenomenal. Just the song was like, what? Why is that loaded up anyway?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
It's a banger, obviously.
Dear, I'm going to a wedding on Saturday, and I think there's some chance they might play that. Anyway, that is all we've got time for from a tennis perspective. The only other thing that remains for me to say is that I received news this week that we have been... The way podcast charts work is weird, and you constantly fluctuate, but we have been this month at some point the number one tennis podcast in Canada and the number one tennis podcast in Australia. So I just want to say good day and a boot to all of our listeners in those respective countries who presumably have now all switched off out of sheer offence. But thank you very much. Keep telling your friends about Tennis Unfiltered, because, hopefully the podcast looks and, if you're watching on YouTube, looks and sounds better, and that is as a direct result of more people listening. So please keep listening, keep telling your friends, and most importantly, please do come back next week.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.